All right, good morning. This is Leroy Wong, and I'm with the BHS Help Desk at the Burlington High School. And so this is going to be, I guess, our third speaker for this week for Computer Science Education Week. So I'm going to introduce Ms. Jade Brewer, who works for GraVoc. And I always feel like I get the name of your company wrong, Ms. Brewer.
You got it right. You got it right.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So I guess I'm just going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself and talk about what you do, and then we do have some questions that we're going to ask you as well. Okay.
Yeah, of course. So my name's Jade Brewer, and I'm a media producer and remote pilot at GraVoc in Peabody. GraVoc is a technology consulting firm that does a lot of different things for local businesses and businesses all over the country. We actually have offices in South Carolina and Texas as well that are smaller remote offices. So a majority of what we do is kind of broken out into four sections: um, information security, information technology, software development, and creative technology, which is where I work. Creative technology is comprised of three different groups that do app development, web development, and video production. And video production is where a majority of my efforts um, reside. So for my kind of day to day, I'm usually doing client interaction, post production, and for the drone work, pre flight planning and preparing for the next flight.
Okay. Excellent. So as I mentioned, I do have one student, Avnish, and Avnish, I don't know if you want to say hello real quick. So we thought possibly he would have passed his Part 107 exam, and we'll explain what that is in a little bit. So Avnish, I don't know if you want to say a quick hello if you're online. I think you were.
Yeah, hello. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Alrighty. Okay, so I guess I'll just go ahead and start with the questions. So, what are some of the things that you do as a drone pilot?
So, as a drone pilot, the work that I do really varies, or at least the clients that I serve really varies. We don't have we don't have a specialization for the kind of drone work that we provide. So, I work with customers that are looking for cinematic drone footage to use in marketing videos. I work with companies that are trying to sell homes. So I work with a lot of realtors, construction sites for monitoring site progress and sharing project progress to stakeholders. And actually, as of this past year, I've actually been uh, diving into automated drone operations. So that's where I work with a mapping software and pre-plot out the flight path, and then once I arrive on site, the drone flies a pre-coordinated flight path that I established. So those are the kinds of projects that I've been working on for the past almost 4 years, actually. I'm actually coming up on my recurrency exam for the second time, which is very exciting. Um, so uh, basically in my day to day, like I mentioned before, it's a lot of pre-flight planning, which is making sure that I am up to date on my knowledge of what the most recent laws are, any changes in the industry, reading airspace maps and analyzing the risk of each and every job that I go out to do. And that can also include applying for airspace authorizations, which is incredibly common in the area that we fly in, which you would actually be quite familiar with, being Burlington High School is right beneath Hanscom Air Force Base. So there's a lot of work that goes into every flight to make sure that it's safe and complying with federal and local regulation. So then you get to the flight day, which there's more work that goes into it on the day of the flight, and it all comes down to interaction with the client as well. So we don't, or at least our department does not have a project manager that really dictates how or is the buffer between us and the client. We actually work directly with the clients, which means that I'm often on site with a client, which is great because it helps me better understand exactly what they're looking for. And it also educates them on exactly what goes into a drone operation. A lot of companies are starting to build their own internal drone programs, and working with me actually helps them better understand how they can use drones in the future. So if you want to get a little bit into the nitty gritty of what I do, I'm not entirely sure how to share screen on here, but I can show you a little bit of how pre-flight planning
Yeah, that'd be
works.
great. So there might be like a
Yeah.
present now button. So
Oh,
if you want to,
yep.
so if
I
you want to
see
show what's
you.
on your screen, that'd be excellent. So I'll let you do that.
Let me just move this to a separate window so you're not seeing yourselves a million times. And okay, so this is Skyward. This is a tool that I use to plan just about every flight that I do. So this is an absolutely fantastic program for managing not only whether or not you're flying in your airspace, but you can also manage your equipment through safety checklists. You can also manage your client base, and you can, of course, manage your operating areas. So sometimes in drone work, you'll end up operating in the same area over and over and over again. So you can actually create a catalog of those areas, so you're not trying to reestablish airspace every single time you go out. And also, they actually just launched a program for doing automated flights, which is pretty exciting. So drone pilots that operate under Part 107 very commonly use an authorization process called LANCE, which basically is an instant authorization process that makes it so you can apply for airspace authorizations pretty much instantly. And this is required for any controlled airspace. And those you can see by the blue circles. And if I search for Burlington High School in here, and it'll bring me right in, and it's going to give me some information on the airspace. So there's lots going on here, and as a drone pilot, it's your responsibility. It's 100% your responsibility to make sure that you're flying as safely and responsibly as possible. Not only, and that's on the topic of safety. So in a space like where Burlington High School is located, obviously it's not only an airport, but it's actually a military airport for the Air Force. So there's a lot more that goes into it. So as you can see, they have a bunch of numbers here, and this denotes what the maximum altitude you're allowed to fly under a LANCE authorization without actually reaching out to air traffic control and getting a more complicated authorization. So Burlington High School is right here. It's actually right next to a heliport. So what would be required of me in that situation is I would also need to notify the heliport. Actually, that just took me to Burlington, Massachusetts. It didn't take me to the high school. But there are heliports within 5 miles of where I would want to fly. So I would need to notify them to make sure that they're aware of any operations that I'll be doing in the area, because drones operate in an airspace that is either from ground level to 400 feet above ground level. And the only manned aircraft that is likely to operate in that area is a helicopter. Apparently I need more coffee this morning. So it's all about making sure that your operation is safe for those on the ground and anyone up in the air. So you also have to be aware of any no-fly areas, which there's a couple different kinds of no-fly areas. Obviously, the most common is directly around the airport. So as you can see in this area here, it's nice and blocked off. This would be a no-fly area because of its proximity to the runways for the airport. And also these red areas denote no-fly restricted areas. And these are commonly seen around places like prisons, military bases, national parks, and anywhere else where it would actually be illegal to fly without getting authorization from the controlling entity. So in this case, it would be without getting authorization from the Air Force. So there's a lot that goes into each and every flight, a lot of research, and a lot to make sure that you're flying safely. So when I decide that I want to pick a space to fly, if I wanted to go, let's see.
So, Ms. Brewer, I was just going to give you our address. It's 123 Cambridge Street in Burlington. If you wanted to, and that way, I guess it would be a good way for folks to see, where we are in the airspace.
All right. Oh, and of course, you guys are a school as well. So there would be another piece of information that I would need to acquire before flying at your school, and that is permission from the school to fly over your property. And that is because obviously there's students, there's privacy concerns, and of course you don't want to accidentally freak anyone out and cause the school to go into lockdown because they don't know that there's a drone operating in the area and they don't know who's flying it. So anytime I fly within proximity of a school where someone from the school might be likely to see the drone in the sky, I make sure to call them and notify their resource officers. So that way they know what's going on and there's no concern about whether or not that drone is coming from someone nefarious or someone who is simply doing their job like myself. So if I wanted to get some great shots of the different sports fields at Burlington High School, what I would do is I would create a new operation and title it, I'm going to title it Burlington Sports so that I know exactly what operation it is when I look at my list. And then I'm going to draw the shape of my operating area. So you want to try and get it as close to exactly where you're going to be operating as possible, especially when you're requesting authorization in controlled airspace. So I just simply draw a shape around the area that I'm going to be filming. And then if I'm going to be doing multiple operations in this area, I would add it to my library. And then I would go into the next portion of the flight planning. So this is essentially just to this is just to get the flight actually in front of air traffic control and notify notify the airport of my operation. So if I wanted to fly today, I would do 10 a.m. 12. And then in order to submit Lance, they would need my contact information. So I would have to note who the pilot in command for the operation is. That would be me. And I include my aircraft. And then as soon as I am ready to submit and I have all of the information that's required for that airspace authorization, I would actually go in and request. And I would have to agree to abide by these rules, to which I would agree to the conditions. And I'm not going to hit agree because you're not supposed to apply for an airspace authorization you're not going to use. So I will hit cancel, but I can show you what one of these authorizations looks like once it's actually accepted. And it would tell me here the decision on whether or not the airspace authorization was accepted or declined by the controlling airport. So this is something that I have to do every single time I'm flying in controlled airspace. If I'm flying in an area that's not controlled by an airport, I'd still go through this process, but I don't have to get the actual airspace authorization. The rest of it is just to log every flight and make sure that the operations are noted for my records. So if something does go wrong on a flight, which happens, if I have a crash or the drone has a flyaway, having these flight logs is very important, because if the drone causes like a car accident or something, or even hits something really expensive, I will have to report the accident to the FAA. And it is not uncommon for the FAA to bring up an investigation in that situation to make sure that you are flying safely and doing things responsibly. So going through this process, just make sure that I'm doing everything I can to be a safe and responsible drone pilot. And all of this is essentially the bare minimum of what I have to do before every flight. Depending on the complexity of the flight, you have to go into more depth. One situation that I'm probably going to talk about later is a really large operation that I did in Boston that involved coordination of multiple agencies and multiple hospitals in order to film several flight areas in Boston in a single day. Or I actually did it over the course of 2 days, but to see what one of these flight authorizations looks like when it's done, let me go and choose an operation that I know had one. I'll go with this one. So this one was in Lynn. And this one, as you can see, the flight area crosses over multiple areas of, or multiple ceilings for allowed altitude. So I had to get an authorization for each and every altitude. But this is what one of those authorizations looks like when it's complete. So it gives me the conditions under which I have to operate. So this is very important, because sometimes if you have to apply for something special, there are additional safety measures that you have to take. There's a flight next week that's going to require a visual observer, which means I have to have a second person with me during the operation to help me keep an eye on the drone and make sure that there's no low altitude aircraft incoming. If anything like that does happen, the flight has to be grounded immediately. But basically, that is a snapshot into planning planning a flight. I can certainly move on to the next question, but from here, I would go and I would fly the operation, which, obviously all of what's required in the operation is determined by the customer, and then I would go into post-production depending on what the customer's needs are as well. So that includes video editing, photo editing, and other skills that I have learned.
I know those are things that he's going
that'll be very important.
Yeah. I'm wondering, do you want to, I don't know if you want to show it from your site or if you just have footage maybe on your computer, because I think all my students definitely know, basic drone operation, and we've captured pictures and footage, but I'd say maybe some of the other students, maybe in Ms. DeRosa's class, haven't seen drone footage, so I don't know if you have something either on your computer, if you just want to show it directly from the GraVoc site.
Yeah, I've actually got our YouTube channel pulled up, and I can show you a couple things. So I'll show you some work that I've done for a construction site, and then also one that I've done that was a really fun project that combined both of the drone skill and the video production skill that I work on regularly. So let me pull this up. I'll start with the construction company. So this is a company that I've been working with actually since I first got my license. They were one of the first companies that I started working with as a customer, which is very exciting that I still work with them. Okay. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. Great. So this is more of a cinematic view of a construction site. But this site actually presented several challenges. It was quite cold, which affects things a lot. It affects it affects how long you're able to fly for, and it also can affect other flight conditions, such as experiencing things like turbulence. Especially when you're flying over a river like this, you get different air temperatures or different temperatures coming from the air and from the water that collide, and that's what creates turbulence. So you can end up with less stable flight, less stable shots in those situations. And then, of course, you also have to make sure that you are flying in a manner that's going to keep the people on the ground safe. This is one that was flown by our team actually before I joined. This was in Boston back when flight regulations were a little different than they are now. Actually a lot different. So we were able to capture some really special, or they were able to capture some really special footage in Boston. This was actually under a different kind of license. And this operation was very cool because it was not only, there were two people controlling the drone. One person controlling the actual flight path and the other person controlling camera operation, which is pretty amazing. So things can get pretty complicated at times for different operations. But when you work on a team like that, you can get some really, really amazing results. Let's see, what else? This is another one that's a personal favorite of mine because this presented several challenges. This video I did for a lumber company, actually kind of out your way, and so I was operating around all of their workers. And what was special about this one is it's the first operation that I did where I was flying indoors, which is very difficult. Your drone's instruments are incredibly sensitive to magnetic material. So depending on what materials the building is actually made out of, you may not actually even be able to fly inside. So these buildings were incredibly challenging because they have these big iron and steel, depending on the building, columns and beams. And iron in particular is incredibly magnetic and can mess with all of your instruments. So I also used ground footage to supplement the drone, and in the areas where I could not fly, they actually had a lift for me. And so I was brought up on this crane to kind of replicate the drone footage and get the same style, even though I couldn't actually fly in some of the areas. And then I've got one other that I can show you. This one was really fun. You might recognize someone in this video.
Brad, you're good. Mission complete. Camo! Yes, sir, Captain, sir! Complete! Complete! Mission accomplished! Mission Matt Light 101 charity shootout accomplished. 2 biggest guns have arrived. I'm bringing all the guns to the shootout this year, baby. Let's go!
So the drone operations are not all necessarily for real estate or construction. You get to do a lot of fun stuff like this, like chase Gronk around in a tank. So there's a lot of really fun experiences you can have as a drone pilot, depending on what you choose to proceed with. So my specialization is more on the cinematic photography, that kind of end, whereas other drone operators are going to be more on the surveying and engineering end of things. And my cat over here is trying to steal the show. But there's so much that you can do as a drone pilot, and one of the biggest things that you can do if you're interested in drones is just figure out ways to bring drones into areas that haven't thought to use them yet. And I believe you wanted to, oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, that was great. I'm not sure if I saw that footage. I think I read about it, but I never actually saw the video. So that was very cool to see that. So I mean, I definitely have other questions, but maybe I'll just take a minute to see if any of my students or Ms. DeRosa's students or Ms. DeRosa or Ms. Graham have questions for you right now. All right. Okay. So I guess let me see, because you've covered a lot of it in the questions, but. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about kind of like your journey as far as like how you ultimately became a drone pilot. So it's been, you said like 4 years, 5 years?
Almost 4 years now, yeah.
Right. So like, you know, what were your work experiences that prepared you for it, or, you know, oh, actually it looks like Mr. Rose has a question. Or any of the movie productions looking to have, I missed the rest of it. Hold on a second.
It was movie productions looking to have drone work in the area. Actually, often, yes. There are often production companies that are looking for drone work in the area. However, production companies that are doing movies tend to be looking for more specialized equipment. So what they would be looking for is a company that has drones that are able to be customizable or be able to lift heavy movie equipment. Our equipment is a little bit more, I'm going to use the word pre-built here because we operate with DJI drones. And so we have a couple of things in our fleet. We have an Inspire 1 drone, we have an Inspire 2, and then we have my little Mavic here. So the only drone that we have in our fleet that would qualify for that kind of quality would be the Inspire 2. And that's because you have, there's a couple of different cameras that you can get for it that have interchangeable lenses and would actually fit what a big film production crew would be looking for. We were actually trying to get in with Netflix when they were doing Hubie Halloween. We were hoping to get connected with them because they had their production office actually right upstairs from us. But they ended up working with, I think, a different group that had equipment that was more geared towards what they were looking for. So it all depends on the kind of equipment that you have. I believe there are a couple drone rental services that exist now. So you can, even if you don't own the equipment yourself, you can kind of break into that. but the insurance that goes with that is pretty expensive. So if movie production is where you want to go with drones, what would probably be a good way to break into that is working with drones to at least working with smaller drones like this to develop technique and be able to perform complex shots and develop a portfolio that way. And then you might be able to join a crew, a flight crew that is doing those kinds of operations, especially if you are already Part 107 licensed. That is going to start probably becoming the minimum requirement for a lot of companies to hire drone pilots, is they might not be as willing to pay for training. They would probably prefer someone who already is licensed, but that's kind of speculation just based on what I've been seeing in industry reports. But there are other companies like engineering firms and construction companies, if that's something that you're interested in, that are more willing to train and do things internally. Usually with movie production crews, they kind of gather their crew from who is local. And actually a lot of companies come to Massachusetts because there's tons of grants and tax benefits for production crews to come and film in Massachusetts. So it would not be there are resources that you can look at to start getting into that. And it's all about networking and who you know, and getting good practice in, and making sure that you have like a fantastic portfolio reel. How did you start with drones, and did you go to college for it? So to answer that question, drones were not actually really on the consumer market while I was in school. I graduated from college in 2013. I actually went to Montserrat College of Art, which is in Beverly, and I have a bachelor's of fine arts in photography, and my personal specialty was landscape photography, so it actually fits with my job quite well. But the consumer drones weren't really on the market at that time, and the ones that were on the market were incredibly expensive, and they used things just like GoPros to capture footage. So there was a huge barrier to entry for a lot of people, especially someone like me, to even break into the industry. So I was actually, when I graduated school, I was working at the Best Buy at the Liberty Tree Mall for quite a while. And that was my first introduction into drones, was once they actually started flooding the market with consumer drones. My introduction to them was learning about them to sell them. And it absolutely fascinated me as a photography tool to just be able to reach new angles and new heights and be able to capture landscape in a completely different way. But as an expensive tool, I had not really considered it until actually my boss, my now boss, Brian, came in as a customer. So it's kind of a funny story, but he and I really hit it off, and we talked about photography and video, and what I do professionally and what I do I also freelance as well. And I ended up giving him my personal business card that day. And I had expressed interest in flying drones because of how cool they were to sell and what I learned about them. And a few months later, they actually had an opening, and he sent me an email offering to have me come and interview for the job. So it was very, very exciting. I actually didn't expect anything to come from that connection, because I had, obviously tried to connect with plenty of people through that avenue. But I ended up coming to interview for the job, and my desire to learn and willingness to train on my own and learn on my own and get this license is actually one of the main reasons why they hired me. Um, so they ended up covering all of my training and the cost of getting my license, which was pretty great. So I was actually able to set aside time at my job to spend several hours a day studying for the test. And then another cost barrier to entry for drone operations is actually paying for the test. It's a $200 test, and you have to pay every time you take it. So if you fail the test, you have to pay again when you go to retake the test. So the fact that I was able to have a job that was willing to provide me with the training and the tools that I needed to get this license really, really helped. And the fact that, you know, they were willing to kind of take a chance on someone who required training. The industry was still so new at the time that it was not common for people to have these licenses yet, and to have acquired them on their own time. Because the Part 107 license came around, I believe, in 2015, if I remember correctly. And before that, it was businesses had to get a 333 exemption, which they had to have a list of qualified people that could fly under that exemption. So the company was also going through a transition of being used to having that type of license and moving to the Part 107 model.
Yeah, that's just an awesome story. And I hope you're okay with this, but I showed the students your LinkedIn profile.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And I had seen that you worked at Best Buy, so just hearing kind of the details of how that all happened is really cool, because we've had students that work at Best Buy as well. So that's one thing that I've always stressed is you never know what connections you can make. Sometimes people think like, okay, retail, it's not such a great job and whatever. I mean, just the stereotypes of, a lot of jobs where you're doing sales and things like that. But you never know what you can learn from that job. You never know what connections you can make. So I think that's such a cool story.
Yeah, and I mean, I made tons of great connections working through Best Buy. I mean, I was a bit of a hustler, and I always carried my personal business cards with me. But my job at Best Buy, I was able to actually get involved with a nonprofit in Morocco, and through that job, I actually got a grant to go to Morocco and film with a crew that was providing medical aid in rural areas of Morocco for 2 weeks through Salem State College. So, you never know who you're going to meet when you're out in the field, even working retail jobs. Because I was, proactive and carried cards on me and things like that. If I didn't do that, or even if I had spoken to a different customer that day, I would not have the job that I have today, because I was also a bit underqualified for the work that I do now. They really were great and worked with me to train me and get me what I needed.
Great. Yeah. So I was sort of putting a little bit of a plug in for how I got my training. So there are a number of places that you can go online to do the training now. And so, as Ms. Brewer was saying, probably in that area, that time of 2014, 2015, there wasn't as much, but now
there's so many schools online.
Yeah, there are online schools. So the one that I did was called Drone Pilot Ground School. And then, I get emails from them. And then I happened to see that they gave scholarships to high school students. So had posted something in my Google Classroom, and then Avnish was like, oh, I'm interested. And I knew that he had a drone anyway. And I was like, yeah, you'd be perfect for this. So then he applied, and I wrote the letter recommendation, so he got it. So, he gets the online class for free. He can take the test for free. So, that's
awesome.
probably about a 500 some, dollar value. So,
that's
cool.
great. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So, all right, so let me just bring up my other questions. And I don't know if other folks have questions too. I don't want to kind of monopolize the asking of questions. Okay, so if not, let's see here. What would you say was like the hardest flight assignment you've had, and why was it hard? Like, I know you talked about incidents and accidents, and knock on wood, we haven't had any here. But like, what are some like challenges you've had?
So drone piloting presents a number of challenges, really kind of no matter what you do. And, challenges can arise in the pre-flight planning. They can arise on site, which has happened. And they can often arise, during post, just like any other video. So, I've had incidences where I have crashed on site while with a client, which, now I bring a backup drone, and I still can conduct the operation even, if something happens. Obviously, provided that the conditions are safe to do so, I can do that. But, I've had issues where I've lost a propeller and actually straight up fallen out of the sky during takeoff, which is why your pre-flight inspection of your aircraft is incredibly important. So you check your propellers, you check your motors, and you check that everything is, not damaged or could fail in any way. In the situation with that, I had a propeller that I didn't see had a crack in it, and the propeller broke right after takeoff because it took so much effort to lift the drone from the ground. And it's honestly, it's just part of the job. But it is scary when you see, an $8,000 machine fall out of the sky. So that presents its own challenges, because then if you're like me and you were on site with a client at the time, you have to speak with the client and you have to explain to them what happened, and you have to make sure that nothing got damaged that was their property. And then you have to go through, the process of assessing whether or not you have to report it to the FAA if the accident was bad enough. And obviously I had to call, my employer, tell them that I crashed the drone, and go through the insurance process there. As far as a challenging flight, where I had a lot to deal with and, had challenges that I had to face and overcome. Actually, it happened this year. It was one of the first operations that I flew during COVID. And it was a massive operation in Boston. There's a construction company that I work with pretty frequently that is doing a major dredging project along the Muddy River in Boston, and they're going to be doing a lot of different work over the next 3 years. So what they needed from me is to essentially create a pre-programmed flight path that we are going to fly every month or 2 months over the next 3 years. So the very first flight is establishing all of those flight paths, making sure that they're correct, making sure they're at the right altitude, and basically mapping out the area before the work starts. So we had several challenges going into that. The first obvious challenge is Boston airspace is incredibly complex and very difficult to fly in, because you have several challenges. Tall buildings, lots of hospitals. The actual airspace is Class B airspace, which usually is denoted in international airports. It's one of the most complex types of airspace, because if you were to draw it, it looks like an upside down wedding cake. So the closer you get to the airport, the harsher the restrictions are, essentially, and then it goes out from there. So the sorry, my cat is doing something he's not supposed to be doing. So you have that challenge. So it's actually there's a lot of steps that you have to take when you're planning the flight that don't even involve mapping out the flight path itself. So I had to coordinate with 3 different hospitals. Apparently there's multiple law enforcement agencies that have jurisdiction in Boston. So I had to figure out which law enforcement agencies I had to notify. So I just kind of notified all of them. And then you have to deal with the actual safety mitigations of the flights themselves. So for me, that was making sure that no matter where I was on site, I was going to be able to see the drone, which is a huge challenge in Boston for a variety of reasons. Trees, buildings, you name it, there's stuff everywhere. And also, in Boston, there's tons of building construction going on. So there's cranes everywhere. So there's all these things that you have to account for that could potentially be a problem. And then Boston is a massive city with a massive population. There's Wi-Fi and all sorts of different other signals that exist that can interfere with your drone's instruments and your ability to connect to the controller.
So, how many people actually do you work with? Like, I'm assuming now you have multiple pilots, and you mentioned like you have someone that's like a visual observer. Like, do you have a team or department? Like, how many people do you work with?
So it's actually still just me. I'm still the only pilot at the company with a Part 107 license. But there is the other person on my video production team, Michael. He has experience flying the drones. He was actually helping out with a lot of the drone operations before I came onto the team. So when a visual observer is required, he steps in. And there was, for a little while, we did have someone on our app development team that was extremely experienced in flying drones. He actually had a drone business in Costa Rica several years ago. So he was the one who actually acted as visual observer for me during this particular operation. So, oh, and I forgot to mention the airspace maps that I showed you earlier. There were multiple altitude restrictions throughout the city. So I had to contend with those, including for one of them, I did have to get a specialty authorization or an advanced airspace authorization that requested more altitude, because otherwise the drone would not have been able to clear the top of the trees. So going into that kind of situation, once you start requesting additional altitude, it becomes a bigger challenge because you're more likely to contend with things like in Boston, it would be news helicopters, medevac helicopters, and police helicopters. So all of those things go into one single operation. I ended up doing this operation. Oh, and on the first day that we were supposed to film, there was a temporary flight restriction because the Air Force was doing a surprise flyover of the city in honor of first responders for COVID. So that the original very first flight ended up having to be called off. So there were so many challenges. But I did it. It got done.
So, and I don't know, how much you kind of know about the general industry, but I kind of, talk to my students about it. But what do you see as like the job outlook for drone pilots? Like, clearly I think the thing that people see is photography and videography, but, there are other things with like geographic mapping, law enforcement is now using drones.
Yes.
Agriculture, so I gave the students like the DJI.com site, and that you can look at all sorts of things that are being done with drones. But what do you see as kind of like the job outlook if you kind of follow that?
I think the job outlook for drones is only going to get better. And there are several reasons why I say that. Before COVID, I actually attended a conference in Las Vegas called Interdrone, which they're actually doing the conference online this year. So they have great podcasts coming out, and you should definitely look them up for your class. They're doing them on Twitch. I actually watched one yesterday.
I'm sorry, what was the name of it again? The organization?
Interdrone.
Interdrone. Okay, thank you.
Yep. But that going to that conference actually completely opened up my mind to what is possible with drones, because I was kind of in, as a pilot myself, I could see the potential with drones, but I didn't exactly know how other industries were using it. But there is so much more that you can do with drones than I think anybody can really imagine. So everybody has heard about Amazon's drone delivery service. That is going to be massive, and I think it's coming in under 5 years to cities across the United States, if I were to guess, based on what is happening in the drone industry as far as regulation is concerned. That drone delivery dream has actually been in existence since like 2014. It actually started as a NASA project, and it had several phases and tested in several cities, and is now, in the hands of the Department of Transportation and approaching the finish line, which is so exciting. So you can see that as a potential. Agriculture, there's so many things that you can do with drones in agriculture that people didn't think of. There are drones that are used on automated flights to water crops. There are drones that can count the individual pieces of fruit on trees, and catalog them. For engineering, there is surveying and mapping. There is equipment inspection. There is so many different things you can do in engineering. Law enforcement, they're used in search and rescue missions. So there are drones that exist that can go, can deal with water, with infrared cameras that can do search and rescue. There's basically drones are starting, you'll see them start to replace people in situations where people could come to serious harm doing those types of jobs. So like someone was telling me one time about having to do inspections on these really, really high like lighting poles on the tops of buildings. And that used to be someone having to climb these massive towers, which imposes a huge risk. If any equipment fails, that person could be in serious danger. Now all you have to do is you send the drone up there to see if the light bulb needs changing. There's so much that you can do, and a lot of it is having people understand what the potential for using drones is. And it's changed so much, even just in the couple of years that I've been in the industry, what you can do with drones. And as the technology continues to evolve, the people who are innovative and creative in how they use drones are going to be the ones that are the most successful. Film and photography jobs are definitely the most common. And that's because anybody can purchase a consumer drone and get started. And then it's all about what you do from there. So automated drone flights is going to be huge. So if you have any interest in programming or anything of that matter, I think everybody's seen the light shows that Intel puts on with their fleets of drones that are really cool. That kind of technology is used in so many different ways. So it's really whatever you think you can do with drones, try it. So the industry is so new. There's really kind of no limit right now.
Great. Yeah, so looks like Avnish had a question, and then Mr. Rosa did. So Avnish's question was, what's the average salary for a drone pilot working as a, I guess...
Doing what I do?
Yeah, I guess so. So obviously you don't have to tell us your exact salary, but just what the range would be for folks, I guess, maybe as they're entering, and then I guess, what would be the range kind of at the top end, I guess.
That's something that I'm not entirely sure about because, like I said, the industry is so varied. There's so much that you can do. I would say that, I do a lot at my job, a lot of different things. So I would say that, a drone pilot working for an established company could probably fetch, between 50 and 70,000. I know that that's kind of a wide margin. This is just kind of my guess. I'm not the greatest at math. But I would say that is a pretty good margin to think about until you start getting into obviously the specialized fields where you get into like engineering and things like that. Freelancers are probably less, unfortunately. And that's because freelance drone jobs is kind of a very similar problem that you would see with freelance photography, freelance video. It's kind of a race to the bottom with pricing. But I think that things are going to balance out as the industry changes, and we'll see a bit more consistency as far as expected salaries are concerned. But I would say that the salary that you can see from doing drone work depends entirely on what you're doing with drones. An engineer with like someone who has a surveying license, who is able to fly drones and map and survey that way, is certainly going to fetch a much higher salary than someone like me. So it all depends on what your interest is and what you want to do.
Okay, and then also Ms. DeRosa had a question. What would be the best starter drone in your opinion? So I noticed, I think you have a Tello over your shoulder, right?
I do have a Tello. This I won it in a raffle at Interdrone. I was so excited. This is actually really fun. I fly it in my house sometimes, much to my cat's dismay. But this one is super fun. It doesn't have the greatest image quality, and it doesn't come with a controller. You have to use your phone, which there are significant limits to using your phone with drones. You simply just don't have the range that you would have on a drone that has a controller. You can buy controllers for the Tello, which work out better, but it still uses the Wi-Fi signal off of your phone and not RC. I would say that if you're looking to be, semi-serious about drones, looking into something in the Mavic line by DJI, whether that is the Mavic Mini, or this is the original Mavic Pro. So this was great for a really long time. I still fly this multiple times a week, actually. So it has fantastic quality, can handle 4K, and it can produce the kind of portfolio that you would want if you want to advance in the industry. And what's great about this, and the reason why I fly this so often, is it's so small. You can fly it very safely in very small, tight areas, which is very common for me. I do a lot of real estate, and in New England, a lot of our streets are very old and have tons of trees and power lines and all sorts of things that you have to navigate around. With the giant Inspire 2 that I fly, I would not be able to go in half the places that I can go with this. And an original Mavic Pro you can probably find for about probably under $1,000 now.
So I guess I'm going to put in another shameless plug for my help desk program. But we have both those drones that Jade has, and we actually do have the kind of sort of game-like controller for the Tello. And under normal circumstances, when we would be doing this week, we usually have students come to the library, and they actually do try out the drones and do kind of like basic coding exercises. But unfortunately, couldn't do that this year, but hopefully next year. And then I also neglected to mention, we've worked with Jade for maybe a couple of years now, because we have had students.
I think 3 now.
Yeah, so we've had students that do like a senior internship, and some students have done like a drone internship. So, we got a grant through it, and that's how we've been able to get the drones that we have, which has been great. And so I don't know, when we'll actually be able to maybe do the internship. I don't know if we'll do it online or not, but we'll be in contact with you if you'd be able to mentor.
Yeah, that'd be
students
fun.
again.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know. Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you go.
There's just one other tool that I want to recommend to people that is incredibly inexpensive and very fun, that can get you kind of started. And that is the drone racing simulator that is available to buy in the Steam game store online on your computer. It is so much fun to play, and you can actually set it up with a VR headset. And if you actually have a drone controller, some of them are compatible, or you can use a PlayStation or Xbox controller connected to your computer. But it's an incredibly realistic simulator, and drone racing is like something else about the drone industry that completely blew my mind and is so much fun. You should, if you haven't looked it up, you should look it up. It's really cool. There is a Boston chapter. But that racing simulator is a great way to learn how to fly, because it's really realistic. So, and it's incredibly cheap to buy in the Steam store. So I highly recommend looking into it.
Okay, cool. I just looked it up, so we will definitely get that. All right. So I don't know if folks have other questions for Ms. Brewer. Sorry, I think I slipped into calling you Jade. But so I don't know if folks have other questions. But I think what you presented was great. I think it was a really good overview of what you do and just in drones in general. But I don't know if any other students or anybody has other questions for her. Okay, if not, I guess we'll go ahead and end the video conference. So thank you so much, Ms. Brewer. It was really awesome. Good seeing you virtually. Hopefully we'll see you in person next school year. We'll see how things go. Maybe we'll see you virtually. We just don't know if we're actually going to do the senior internships. I think with drones, it is something you can kind of do outside. So it might be something we'll possibly do, but we'll keep you posted. And thank you so much, just for doing this and doing all the stuff you've done with us over the years. All right?
Yeah, of course. It's been a lot of fun, and I love talking to everybody. If anyone does have any more questions, Mr. Wong, you can certainly give my GraVoc email to people, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that. All right.
Yeah, of course.
So have a good rest of your day and have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Yep, and thank you everybody for tuning in. All right? Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye.